Hi, Oscar. Welcome to Venture with Grace today.
Hey, Grace. Thank you for having me.
Um, so first of all, I just want to express my thankfulness that it's your 9 p.m., which is, I feel like it's a really cool time to do a show like this. It's live.
It's a great time. It's 9 in the evening in Stockholm, which this time of year is quite dark, and so it's a perfect time to hop on a snug live event like this. So it's great.
Amazing. Okay. I have so first of all, what is a panda behind you doing? Like, what is a panda about?
So this is my wife and I are into all different kinds of art. The quirkier, the better. And when she found this neon panda with pink guns, it was a no-brainer. Of course, you need a neon panda with pink guns on the back of your study, right? And so, since like half a year, she lives there, and I think she's badass. And so that's why she's up there.
Oh wow, it's a really cool thing. Anyway, okay, so let me so as I mentioned prior to this, like I've listened to like a bunch of your interviews. Let me summarize your story, and then you can tell me if I'm like wrong. I'm pretty sure I will be wrong. But okay, so you started your career in BCG after school. You went to Wharton. You went to so basically you're a finance guy. You're good with numbers. You're very hardworking, and later on, your godfather introduced you to some guy. And this guy who is like a creative guy who is a great producer. And you guys like went down this like entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah.
You worked in television after BCG, and you guys were basically yeah, you worked in television before you started, you know, Epidemic Sound. So that's like my overall very like broader view of
Great.
like your career journey. Okay.
It's great.
So
It's totally right. There's nothing to correct. You're right.
so
I'm
can you
flattered.
let us know more about okay, I want to ask you, so like I feel like there's so many founders, they have created a company in the music space, but not everybody can create like $1 billion business. So
Mhm.
I wanted to understand from your perspective, what is like the secret thing that like earned secret that you had early on that you feel like kind of help you understand how the money flow in the industry, and what were the secret you were built based on for your company?
Yeah. Um, so let's see if we can unpack that together. I would say if I don't start with the industry first, rather as like a broader answer to your question,
Mhm,
I think that there are a couple of secrets to having the chance to get to be a part of building a company which becomes as big as Epidemic. And I
mhm,
think that one of them is um, I'm remarkably mediocre at many things, but I like to think that there are two to three things which I'm really good at. Um, One of them is creating a sense of trust. And so that's crucial because I've been really privileged to be able to talk to and generate trust and then attract incredibly talented people over the last decade and a half to join the Epidemic band and come play and work with myself. And I'd say that that's the number one reason why you're successful over time. Like talent solves way more than 80% of all challenges out there, right? And so I
mhm.
think attracting talented people and having the opportunity to build like a diverse and successful team, I think is one crucial component. Um, the second component, I would argue, is perseverance. Um, because I think that success is ultimately just day in, day out. If you get it slightly more right than you get it wrong for a very long period of time, that tends to compound, in my opinion. And so we make mistakes all the time. I make tons of mistakes every single day. But as long as you just get it slightly more right every single day and you're willing to walk the week, the month, the quarter, the year, the decade, like that's one of the sort of wonders of the world, compound interest. So just doing it over time, that enables you to become successful, even though you might be a mediocre Swede like myself. So I'd say that those are like the two profound insights that I've had. Like, and then I can joke about some other things, but I think that having that endurance, that perseverance, that's difficult. It takes a lot of time and sacrifice, and you need to be of a certain persuasion to sort of enjoy it, which I do. But I'd say that those are the two big ones outside of the industry. I'll pause there. I'll gladly jump into the industry too, because there are a gazillion things we can talk about there. But those would be my two findings.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit on a daily basis. How do you attract the best talent? What do you think like best talent look like? Where are they hanging out and why you? Like how do you kind of approach them?
Um, I think that, and this is going to sound ironic given that this is an interview where I'm doing the talking, but I think that one of the most important things that you need to be committed to if you are a founder or an innovator or an inventor or somebody like myself who loves to play around with Rubik's cubes is you need to be curious, right? And so your default needs to be to ask questions.
Mhm.
It's pretty important, but then to listen to the answers, which is crucial. And most people are passive listeners. They might be good at asking questions, but to really enjoy and to listen to answers. So typically, I'm a bit more reluctant to talk, and I love to ask questions and I love to hear other people talk. And I think that's important because basically just getting to know people, understand their journey, where they're on, what makes them tick, what makes them upset, what makes them excited, where they've been, what their hopes and dreams are. If you meet a lot of people and you're able to have those kind of discussions, you can start to understand what people mix with one another, where they are in their life, what they are excited about, what they're not. And then you can start to build this massive puzzle of people who have some some characteristics have to be common across all of them. So I think that maybe hardworking, honest, humble is good, but not a must. A sense of humor I find is very, very important because the journey is going to be long and grueling. And as I said, like on a great day, you get it 52% right, but then you have 48%, which is just wrong. And on a bad day, it's like 51-49. So you're always going to have a lot of setbacks and make a lot of mistakes. And if you don't have people around you who can smell the coffee and smile and have some self-distance, it's going to be a long slug. So I think that humor is important, being a good listener, and then putting those teams together. And then I think creating a sense of purpose and, dare I say, optimism. You don't have to manufacture optimism. I mean, often a lot of the time it's there per se, I guess. But I have a very strong opinion about like being an optimist isn't a God-given trait. I don't subscribe to when people say, "Oh, you're such a positive person. You're so lucky. That must be so easy. I'm such a dark person." It's in terms of how I see the world, and I would argue so. No. Everyone sees that the glass is exactly on the middle when it comes to water, and you can choose to say that that glass is half empty, and nobody's going to be inspired, or you can choose to always say the glass is half full, and people are going to commit and say that yes, it is. And so I think it's setting that team, being a good listener, setting the team, connecting the right kinds of people, creating that sense of purpose and optimism, and then making sure that you have some common traits and some different ones. That's how I'd summarize it.
Mm. That's so well said. I wonder, so like well, not yesterday, last week, I've been gotten a feedback from a person I know says like I listen too much. Like they literally said like that makes you uninteresting because you listen too much, you don't have anything to add. I wonder, you mentioned active listening. What does that entail?
So, first of all, I think that your friend is totally in the right. I wouldn't subscribe. In general, I think, or maybe in business in particular, extremes are typically not great. So extremely growth focused or extremely profitability focused is rarely the right way. There's typically a golden mean somewhere. And so I think the same is true as it relates to listening. So I think it's very important to be an active and a good listener. But then once in a while, I think you need to process that signal and then come up with your own ideas, communicate, agree, disagree, sometimes commit, sometimes not. So I would agree that it's not great to be like a one-way speaking partner, A, for yourself, but also B, for the people around you. People want, especially like very cerebrally strong intellectual people, they want to be challenged. They want to have somebody to spar with. They want to say provocative things and sometimes be questioned about it. Not all the time for the for the sake of questioning, but you want to create that environment where there's intellectual honesty, there's rigor, but also there's risk, there's analysis, and then, as I said before, like the camaraderie on top of that.
Mm. How do you create like a story arc in each conversation that you try to chat with someone?
Good question. I'm not sure that there is a specific recipe for how you would go about putting a story arc for every single discussion. I think it varies with your state of mind, your purpose, the person. Like if there's any specific uh, idea you want to get across, or piece of knowledge that you need to accumulate together, or something that you need to problem solve together. So I think it varies very much on the context, but I think that it's always clear that it happens in the intersection. So in the dialogue as opposed to in the monologue. Then it sort of takes two to tango, right? So I think the interesting stuff happens as you sort of, interact with each other, and arguably, like the most interesting things tend to happen when there's friction. So when there's disagreement, or even wild disagreement, that's when you really want to sort of pay attention, because then you can learn something. Then it becomes really interesting, and if you're super fortunate, you get to change your point of view, which is a beautiful thing, because then you've accumulated more signal, have a clearer point of view, and if that changes, like kudos, you've taken a step forward.
When you are okay, so let's jump into the music industry. We talked so much about like personal development. So I wonder, um, how does the money flow in the industry? And you made like a really bold move of like acquiring all these rights from the artists, recreating how the model works in the music industry, cutting out the middleman.
Mm.
Tell us more about like how does the money flow in the music industry? What are the players? How it was function, and when you came in, what changed?
Yeah. Um, so historically, the music industry was a beautifully complicated ecosystem, and I say that with a lot of affection. Um, it was complicated because the music industry hinged on a model of representation as opposed to ownership. And what I mean by that was, or is, that if you think about a specific track, like a piece of music, almost like a term sheet,
Mhm.
um, then the traditional music industry is put together in a way that no one person owns that track. Rather,
Mm,
there are multiple shareholders
mm,
who have a claim, and they own different percentage points. So there's an artist who a traditional listener might think is like the sole inventor, creator of that track, and often in cases that couldn't be further from the truth. So an artist might hold a certain percentage point in the potential revenue of that track. Then you had the songwriter who actually wrote the track. Now she or he could have like significantly more than the music artist in question. Then you have a producer, and then you have studio musicians, you have top liners, you have beat makers. And then you have a long line of industry organizations who've historically played an important role in getting that music out to the public. So you have record labels who financed the recording of the master when you had to go to an expensive record label studio to record it. You had the publishing side of the business who would support the songwriters and sort of help make sure that they got paid eventually. You had the performance rights organization, you had the neighboring rights organization who paid for sync and for mastering. But ultimately, there were a ton of people on that cap table. And that was a bit of a challenge because one, they didn't always tend to agree with each other. And so there would often be conflict. Two, they all had veto rights, such that if the track was interesting for somebody to use, especially in a soundtracking context, you had to get the permission from all of the shareholders on that track before you could use it. And if somebody said, no, I'm not getting paid enough, or I want a fixed fee, I want a variable fee, I want part of the sales, I want part of the ad revenue of your podcast, Grace, like everyone had to be appeased before you could use that track. And so it was basically a tragedy of the commons, right? And then to make matters even more complicated, you would then add, in terms of collecting monetization, all of these stakeholders, they kind of, I think abdicated is a strong word, but they didn't set up the infrastructure such that they could charge for the music. So they were reliant on third parties, such as streaming platforms like Spotify or Apple or Deezer or others to collect money directly from subscriptions and pass them on, or if you're on the VSPs, so the video streaming platforms, the Metas, the YouTubes, and the Instagrams and the TikToks of the world, then you'd get paid directly by the platforms instead. So it was this incredibly complicated ecosystem of both destinations, creators, administrators, and basically there were nuances in every single country on the planet Earth to how these were organized, how they were set up. Sometimes they would play nice with each other. Sometimes they had monopolies, oligopolies, and it was just wildly complicated. And as you can imagine, it was quite inefficient. So that's the world we looked into. That's how the industry was set up. So people had different roles to play in the industry, and the idea was that the money would be collected at the point of consumption, typically, such when you view a video or when you listen to a track, and then it would trickle down into this ecosystem. But as you can imagine, that was complicated. It hinged on the opposite of transparency, the opposite of technology. It was analog, it was opaque, it was sometimes organized around paper. Music cue sheets had to be filled out, reported, and so it was just like very, very construed. And that's where
Mm.
we took this massive contrarian bet. Like the big innovation in our business in the early days was we did the unthinkable, and we said that instead of building music industry around representation, we'd like to build it around ownership. So we, as a sole proprietor, would like to commission tracks and then buy 100% of all of the rights, such that there is no cap table, there are no multiple ownerships, there are no other veto rights. We'll pay handsomely upfront, but we want to own 100% of the rights, because we think that if we do that, like, we can have a transformative impact on the music industry, because we think that if we hold all the rights to music, we are then in a position where we can warrant to our future customers that, hey, dissimilar to all other music on the planet, where you have these complicated cap tables, in our music, we own 100%. So we can guarantee you can use this music until the end of days, across all platforms ever invented and everything that's ever going to be invented in the future. We've paid for it. We've taken care of the artist. We've built a product that is fit for purpose, and we can guarantee you a great user experience. That was unique. And so that was some people were willing to pay for that peace of mind, that ease. So in the early days, we were very much an IP innovation. On top of that, because we owned all the rights, we could then turn the industry into a subscription model, because otherwise it was based on consumption and quite volatile. But as we accumulated a big catalog, we could then set a fixed subscription fee. And as the catalog compounded, the value increased for customers because there was more money, more catalog for the same subscription fee. As we got more and more customers, suddenly we generated the financial incentive for ourselves to invest massively in creating the cultural infrastructure needed to run a product like this, such that we could source music from all over the world. We could build the infrastructure. We could integrate with the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Metas of the world, like all the different stakeholders, all the different platforms. We could create structural value because we had a very predictable business model. And then from then it evolved and evolved and evolved. And like 15 years down the line, we reach about 2.5 billion people every single day listen to our music. I think we soundtrack about 20% of all of YouTube. We're huge on all the big social media platforms, all the discovery platforms, the streaming platforms. I think we work with 70% of the world's 500 largest YouTubers, 90% of the world's multi-channel networks. Many of our generation's most prolific storytellers depend on us to provide them with the emotion, the music, the tooling, the sound effects, the data, the insights, such that their contents become incredibly compelling to watch.
Okay. So I have like two big bracket of question. I want to say hi to the
Sure.
audience. Hi, Pavan. Anyway, so I okay. So one thing is like I really like how you're describing it as I feel like it sounds like it's a giant. You compare it to like you compare the music industry at the beginning. You mentioned like term sheet, right? So I think you come from like a finance background. You are acquiring artists music, right? So it's kind of like a mini M&A like kind of deal to you. So like it's like you're acquiring a bunch of stuff, right? So I wonder at the beginning, what type of artists like do you go after first? Like what was the strategy there in terms of approaching the artist? And I feel like as a smaller artist, like I mean, if I create a piece of music, sure, like buy it, go ahead. Like, you know, it's like I don't really know if it's gonna go anywhere anyway. But
Yeah.
when it become bigger, like I don't know, like if you like so I never even I use Epidemic Sound. I never really pay attention to who is the artist, to be honest. Like I mean, I just listen to like whatever, like adding whatever music that fitting into the mood or something. But I wonder, um, what is what does it evolve like how does it evolve into like some bigger artists, I assume, and like how do you guys look at like who to acquire first?
Yeah. So I
And
think
then
that
it also sounds like a really big amount of like money gonna be consumed into like acquiring these little piece of music, like,
yes.
because I feel like it's a lot of money, sounds
Yeah.
like.
So over the last decade and a half, there have been many hundreds of millions of dollars that have been put towards acquiring incredible IP from like really talented artists all around the world. So that's a huge part of our value prop to help create sustainability and predictability for artists who typically have been not spoiled in that sense whatsoever.
Mhm,
It's been a very fickle revenue stream, and they've had to
mhm,
complement it with having part-time jobs in other industries. But if we dive into how we found the artists and how we built the business, it was very much like down to first principle. And so we took a long, hard think around artists and their well-being, and we thought, so what was the most important thing if you're an artist? And we concluded that there were two things that we thought was super important.
mhm,
So one was distribution. Like, if you're a creative person, you want as many people as possible to hear what you've created because there's a voice in you, there's an expression, and you create something to get a signal back, right? So part of it was distribution. We understood that getting distribution is really hard. Like as an individual artist, that's so difficult. So that was one thing. Like, how can we help solve for distribution? And the second thing was sustained monetization. Like, how can you survive and ultimately thrive on your craft? So these were the two things that we put together, and these were actually the drivers behind why we built the business. So it wasn't financial engineering at all, even though like numbers is something I'm comfortable and my co-founders and our teams are as well. But that wasn't the starting point. The starting point was how do we build a sustainable music industry that we're proud of? One also where we can connect artists to content creators like yourself who want to tell beautiful, compelling stories, but they're struggling finding music because it's so litigious, it's expensive, it's difficult, there aren't any tools, it's not structured around the creative processes that I'm comfortable working in. And so say it was much more driven from that aspiration. It was definitely not a P&L or an Excel sheet or an arbitrage. Like quite the contrary. We wanted to build something beautiful. We wanted to help soundtrack the internet, which we think is our generation's most sort of astounding collective achievement. And so that's how we began. And the way that our flywheel works is that it's quite straightforward because we started small. We built a small but beautiful catalog of music where all the rights were cleared and the technology was significantly better than everyone else's. It wasn't even close to where we are today, but in the early days, it was better than the rest. And we had a compelling proposition that granted us product market fit, and we scaled like crazy. So it turned out our generation's most prolific storytellers started using Epidemic at scale. And a
mhm.
byproduct of them using us at scale was distribution. Because when you start soundtracking PewDiePie and Mr. Beast and all these other big platforms, suddenly you're reaching hundreds of millions of people. And their brand name is bringing your music to a completely new audience worldwide. So as the music distributes, we saw a second order consequence was that we put all our music on the music streaming platform. So Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon and all of them. And when people started listening to the music online through the videos that they cherished and loved, they all started shazamming and looking for the music on streaming platforms. And so that grew as well. That started to bring in much more revenue than we anticipated because suddenly we were getting royalty from the traditional music industry, which we would collect and then split right down the middle with all of our music creators. And word spread, and music creators learn quite quickly that, hang on, if I join Epidemic, I'll get paid up front, I get to reach hundreds of millions of people. And then on top of that, I'll also get royalties from all the streaming that comes downstream. Like that sounds like distribution, it sounds like monetization, and it sounds like an incredible place to work. So we got better artists, they got us bigger customers, they gave us more distribution, they gave us more money, we could share with more artists, and so off went the flywheel. So it was, I would argue, it was again back to, it was built on listening and understanding, like what's first principle important for storytellers and for artists, and how can we carefully listen, understand, and then connect them in a way such that we get a flywheel effect around it.
Mm. I wonder, how did you convince your first investor to invest in this? I feel like if I were a investor, I hear about this idea of like someone is gonna go spend the money to acquire a bunch of music that may or may not take off. I will I will be like, let's wait for the next round and the next round and the next round until like you guys IPO. So I wonder,
You're
how do you convince people, and then who are you first like believer?
you're totally right. And there's this I'll not share an anecdote. It was very straightforward in the sense that we were 5 co-founders at Epidemic, and we were fortunate because all of us had built companies before. So this wasn't our first rodeo. So we'd built companies, sold companies. 2 of my co-founders are incredibly successful music producers, so they'd sold hundreds of millions of albums. So to your point, you're 100% right. In the early days, we didn't ask for other people's money because we didn't want it and we didn't need it. And so for the first 5 years, we financed everything ourselves. And in hindsight, that was amazing because we had complete agency. Like there were 5 people, we owned 20% each of the company. Every month, nobody got a salary. We just got a check, pay in this, pay in this. And so we paid our own way for the first 5 years. So that allowed us to make all the mistakes, but also all the right decisions, of cut the right corners, be meticulous in the right corners. We could build a business, we could build a rapport, we could build a catalog such that when we did see that, wow, this is working, now we'd like to scale after 5 years of building and we own 100% ourselves. That's when we went to the first investor. They didn't have to take our word for it. They could look in our sort of in our dashboards, and they could see exactly how we were performing, how we were growing, how we were converting. And so that was important for us. And I think that at the time we were, I guess, confident but a bit nervous, in the sense that we're doing this differently. This isn't how you're supposed to. There's supposed to be, I'm wildly opposed to the traditional setup. Like, I don't like seed A, B, C, D, E, F. I heard that there was a G round the other day and I laughed loud. I, and I think the issue I have is not with investors and money. I deeply respect them. I work with some of the most sophisticated investors, but it's the standardized nature. Like, if you're an entrepreneur, like, you're basically saying to yourself and your world, I want to be different. I want to think different, do different, act different, test different. I want to walk my own route and see what happens. But then if you want financing to make that happen, you have to compromise with those values, and you go, you need to do a seed round, and this is the exact deck, and this is the number, and this is the person you need to talk to, and then that's the first hire, and this has to be the second one. There's no fun in that, because then you're following somebody else's lead and you're doing exactly what everyone else did. It's a bit like being an athlete saying that I want to be the best in the world and I'm going to train exactly like everyone else. I can promise you're not going to be the best in the world if you train like everyone else. You need to go bonkers so you're a little bit better than everyone else. And so in hindsight, I'm delighted that we didn't walk the traditional route, because we got to be nuts. We did stupid things, we did glorious things, but we did our things. And then 5 years in, we went and we met with investors, and we were an odd bird. We were quirky. We spoke differently, thought differently, but because we didn't have the manners, but we didn't want to conform, because we wanted to be different. Like, that was the fun in it.
What were some really bad things that you guys did early on that you feel like, you know, eventually you avoid? Like, what were some learnings early on?
So a couple different, I think one of them has to do with positioning and storytelling. So it's a bit ironic. Like, we're all about storytellers and we love storytelling, but in the first 5 years, we were adamant about keeping our heads down. We were forged in an age where you had, if you're a European, you can relate to the Samware brothers, and so Rocket Internet. So they basically had this business model, which was identify promising startups, replicate their business, out execute them,
Oh,
and then
yeah,
sell the
those
business at
guys.
a ransom back to said company. You didn't want to be exposed to that, right? So you didn't want to keep your head up. You didn't want to say to people what you were doing, nor did we want to alert the industry, because we thought that the dynamics in our space were such that there was a winner take all or a winner take most. And if we
Mm,
were to tell people what we were doing, we couldn't get to escape velocity, we couldn't get to critical mass, we couldn't get our flywheels working. So we decided actively, like, let's shut up. Let's not. If anyone asks me what I did at a dinner party in the early days, which, if I'm being honest, you didn't get invited to dinner parties that often because you were working all the time. But on the off chance that you were invited, I would just tilt my head and I say, you know what? We do elevator music. It's so boring. There's nothing to see here. But what do you do? Tell me about your life. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. We love our music, our artists, our process. It was amazing, but we didn't want attention. So we held a very low profile. And on the one hand, that was brilliant because we did get to scale. We were able to build our business such that we could grow it and become very large. So you could argue in part we were successful. But I would argue it was way more difficult for us to hire said talented people because nobody'd heard of us. We could sort of say that, look, this is us. And they would, I've never heard of you. You can't be that good. So that was a struggle. It was difficult because we didn't get to own our own narrative, because the bigger we became, the more successful, even though media might not take note, the music industry definitely did. And they were wildly scared that we were outpacing them, outrunning them, outthinking them in some instances. And so they had a vested interest in painting a very unflattering picture of us. And because we didn't officially opine, we didn't sort of get into the conflict because we were much smaller and we wanted to keep low profile. That was difficult for us to deal with. So we got a lot of press. I would argue ultimately it it worked to our benefit, but on balance, I'm not sure I would have had the same stealthy setup this time around. Maybe yes, maybe no. Um, I think that in the early days, what else? Um, we tested a lot of different things, as in not spray and pray, but sort of there's some kind of a weird solace to firing a shotgun because you think that something's going to hit something, right? Whereas if you think about it differently, if your most valuable resources are your product and your engineering talent, and if you spread them over 4 or 5 different bets instead of focusing on one, odds are you get less oomph, less focus, less progress in something that really works, and instead you're like half-assing it across 4 or 5 different things, and it's a fake sense of hedging your bets. And so I think we probably would have been even more focused, even though we've been dead centered on soundtracking video on the internet. We would have been even more focused, I think. So those are maybe 2 things that come to mind.
I think you have a lot in common with like the early stage investors in the Bay Area. Like you are
Yeah.
literally investing in early stage artists
Mm.
because of, to a degree, like you're like front load the money to like buy their rights and like, basically I feel like it just sounds like I think it's such an interesting thing that you've shared that like, I feel like no one would probably imagine that because if I feel like we live in like a really um like startup, like sexy startup world in the Silicon Valley, everyone's like trying to shoot for the best investor from the very, very early on. But
Yeah.
like bootstrap sounds like a very non-cool thing, but on the other hand, I bet like from the equity perspective, you can save a lot of hustle
Yeah.
and save a lot of like the explanation that you have to do to earn the trust at the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the last 10 years. So 5 years you were like bootstrapping, I assuming each year you spend one co-founder salary or something.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
anyway, so now we're in like
That's literally what happened, Grace. After 5 years, I tapped out. I told all my co-founders, I have no more money. I'm completely broke. We have to do something.
okay, so what about the 10 years? So like what does a 10-year look like? How many kind of hurdles you have to go through? Like, I guess like bigger hurdles. We're not talking about like the daily grind. We're talking about like what maybe three different stages from, your first raise of funding to, like a big, maybe like a big hurdle that you have to go through. Like, how do you separate the 10 years into a couple different stages for you?
So that's a good question. I think that I'd say that there are a couple of different phases, and there are three distinct things that come to mind. I'd say that there was this there was a point in time when I knew we had product market fit.
Mhm,
I'll keep it short. Like, we had my wife and I had our third child. I was standing in front of the telly. He'd just eaten. He needed to burp. It wasn't going very well. He was on my shoulder. I was patting his back. I was bending my knees, as you do if you're a parent, and you want to get a burp going. I was looking at the television, and I had the remote in my other hand, and I saw that the TV show playing was playing our music in the background, and I thought
mm,
that's cool. And then I switched channels. So Sweden only had 5 channels at the time.
mhm,
So yeah, we're like a weird country in by the North Pole. So don't blame us. I switched the channel to the second channel, and they were playing our music also. Different music, different show, but our
mhm,
music again. I was like, that's cool. Switch to the third channel. They're playing our music. Fourth channel. They're playing our music. Fifth channel. He finally burps, and then so I get this eureka moment where I see that like we're soundtracking every single commercial TV channel in our home country, Sweden. Like this works. This is beyond just a crazy idea. There's something here. And then I sat down later that evening, emailed my co-founder, said, "Look, we have product market fit. We've tested this in television. We now need to go soundtrack the internet." And that's when we started flying back and forth to San Bruno to hang out with YouTube. But I'd say that was the ending phase of the first. Let's test and see if there is something here. Like, what is this like? And then I'd characterize the second phase. I would call the startup phase, because before that it was just seeding and testing and experimentation. But the phase after, I'd say, is when you're a startup, and you're a startup because as one of the founders, when you go to bed in the evening, like at least this is how I work. Like when I go to bed, I'm tired, almost like a metaphor. Like, as I drift off to sleep, sort of, I leave my experience to one side, my irony sort of falls away, my ambition falls away, and you're just like really honest with yourself before you fall asleep because you're most vulnerable, or I am. And then the last thought is always like, yeah, but I wonder if this idea is good enough. Like soundtracking the internet, is that really a thing? Like, how do I explain the TAM to someone? I sort of everyone on the internet or every website. I sort of, ooh, I can't really. So you wonder a lot about the idea, and then you drift off to sleep, and then you come up the next morning and you hop up and you go. And you repeat that procedure every single night, 365 days a year. So you go to bed wondering, like, I wonder if the idea is good enough on some level. And then gradually, at some point, you realize that you stop having that discussion with yourself when you go to bed. And suddenly, I came to realize that I'm not asking myself that anymore. I'm asking myself, I wonder if I'm good enough. I wonder if the people running this company are good enough to do the idea justice. And that's when you know that you're not running a startup, but you're running a scale up. Because if you stop worrying about the actual idea, but you worry more about, okay, so the idea is great. It apparently works, but are the people good enough? Like, are we smart enough? Are we humble enough or aggressive enough? Are we international? Are we focused? Are we sort of thinking in the right way? Or are we diverse enough? Like, that's when you know you're a scale up. So those, I think, for me, were three distinct different phases. You could split it differently. So I could talk about like first round of financing, second, third, becoming a unicorn and these things. But I remember thinking that when I hit those milestones, I thought that I would be, and this kind of gives me away because I'm a soundtrack buff. But if you've seen Rocky, like he's training in Philadelphia, he's running up the steps. You see the music pumping in his veins and his fist, and I thought I'd be euphoric when we hit those rounds or got to those big financial quote unquote milestones. It was the exact opposite. you're so tired when a process like that finally closes. The only thing that I wanted to do is I went home, so crept into bed, didn't want to talk to everyone. So thank God I've not let everyone down. We lived to fight another day. We made it to this stage. We made it. So let's see if we make it to the next stage. So for me, those financial like milestones, as important as they are and as incredibly grateful, they're not the source of euphoria or joy. Like you wake up the next day and you sit and you said, okay, I have 1 billion SEK, or I have $100 million or $300 million now that I'm the custodian for, and I have to deploy it in a super careful way, but with great outcome. So it's a different piece of the work. So I think the moments are more the profound ones, like I said, with my son, and you get there's a product market fit or the psychological understanding. And obviously, like the massive wins with your colleagues, like those are the ones that sort of really stick out when you realize that sort of we signed Jordan Sparks last year in the US, and she's like a super successful US based singer. We've just signed a couple of new really big names which we've not announced yet. So getting to work with next level artists, when we start to work with content creators, when you hear their feedback in terms of we now soundtrack X, Y, or Z, like those I think are the bigger moments for me. They're more emotional, less structured.
Mm. I wonder, what do you think it was like the biggest hurdle you have to across in terms of like hiring or like the people side of things? What are some stuff you have to go through?
Um, I think it's hiring is hard. Like hiring is really hard because people are complicated. People in groups are even more complicated because they're dynamics and there are sort of relative things as well. Running a startup and even more so running a scale up is super grueling. And so high pace, low margin of error, high stakes. And so in general, I'd just say that hiring people is hard, but hiring in super ambitious scale ups is really, really hard. Um, like just retaining the same role for 6 to 12 months in a fast growing company is the equivalent of being maybe promoted 2 or 3 times because your job is completely different. And so that forces like it's this contradiction because on the one hand, I can actually speak to another thing that we did that we made a mistake that I regretted, which we've since rectified, was that in the early days, like as a metaphor, when I would talk about the company and the business, I'd love to talk about us as a family, in the sense that we look out for each other, we take care of each other, we do things together. And so it was a very natural way for me to discuss to talk, because it made sense. Over time, I realized that it was wrong, though, and it was wrong because it highlighted one of the things that I think was a mistake, but that it also was hard to your sort of latter question, which is like a family hinges on unconditional love, right? And so you can do whatever you want, Grace. If I'm your parent, I'm going to love you anyway. Like it's not a reciprocal street. Like you get away with literally anything if we're kin. Um, and that's in a stark contrast to a company because it's a social contract. Like we're only a team as long as I have an expectation, you deliver, and vice versa. And as long as that bond is intact, we're together. But if it's not, there's no unconditional love. And so that was unfortunate because that created a dynamic where as a startup, you're tiny, everyone is a generalist, you do a little bit of everything, you pull weight for one another. That goes a long way. But then you hit that point, the inflection point I mentioned, you go from startup to scale up, and suddenly you need to be more focused. It's not about breaking stuff and experimenting, it's about fine-tuning and scaling. And then you need a different person, perhaps with a different skill set. And if everyone is under the assumption, hey, we're family, like I'll just switch and do something else. And it's like, nope, like this is where our roads, so this is the end of the road. that was a painful transition. I think a team or a band or something like that is much more appropriate, because in that analogy, you're talking more about conditional love. Like, you're in this band as long as you show up to practice and you play the songs that we agree on and we sing from the same sheet. You're in the team as long as you show up to practice, you do physical, and we score goals and we win games. If we don't, like, we're switching the players. And I think that that's part of the difficult role, creating that, because it's so grueling. So you need to create a very close, tight-knit dynamic where everyone is almost willing to take a bullet for each other. But at the same time, you need to be clear about the ground rules, that it's a business and there needs to be a structure and a reciprocal setup. And so I think that's difficult. I think that's tricky.
Um, what do you think was like one of the hardest thing you have done in your journey as a founder and CEO?
Mm. The hardest thing that I had to do was transition from a startup to a scale up. And I'll share using an analogy. So I was in the Swedish mountains many years ago with my family, my wife and all our kids. The last day, the weather had been really poor. The last day, the weather was beautiful. It was freezing. And we went on a dog sled tour. And so there were 7, 8 huskies. My family was sitting on the sled, and we ran over the mountains. It was incredibly beautiful, almost religious in nature. And it served as such a great analogy for how my job had changed at Epidemic, because during the first 5 years, back to your definition of 10 and 5, during the first 5 years, I'm a husky, Grace. I love to get strapped in, and with my other dogs, I just pull the sled. I run, tongues out, sweaty. It's difficult. We try things. We go left, we go right. We're a team. I'm tired. Somebody else is strong. Like, I get goosebumps just talking about it. So that's what I do. It's in my DNA. I'm a work dog. I really enjoy doing that. So it's where I get my sense of endorphins, purpose, camaraderie, community. I love doing that. And so for the first 5 years, like, I didn't matter what room I went into at Epidemic, I knew as much or more than everyone else, because I was the lead dog running in all those different positions, right? So legal, finance, sales, as if not ML didn't exist 15 years ago, same way it does today. But and my colleagues would laugh at me today, but back then that was kind of true. And then back to the sled rides. Of fast forward 5 years, when you go from being a startup to a scale up as a CEO, if like, you're not supposed to be a husky in the front anymore. Your job is to stand at the back of the sled, have huskies which are much more sort of stable and better than you are, because they're domain experts. They know everything about product or engineering or music or sales. They're not this generalist dog that you are. And your job is to stand at the back and look at the horizon. Like, where are we going to take a break? How thick is that ice? Like, that looks like a wolf. Like, we should probably take a break here. I want to go left. I want to go right. Where are my other huskies? Like, where's the sled that was next to me with all our food? We need to sort of stay close to that. So your job is to look at the horizon. And so that's the job of the scale-up CEO as opposed to the startup CEO. And initially it sucks, because you get no energy from managing cap tables, building out middle management, securing new leases, going through insurance issues. Like, running a big company is dramatically different from running a startup. I never got to meet customers, no sales, no music, no hustle, no build. Like, my job is to stand and look at the horizon and let other people do the job. So you get depressed, you get sad, you don't feel good, you feel sort of like, I used to be a good startup CEO. Now I'm a mediocre / shitty scale up CEO. Like, that's harsh, because you have to retrain your entire body to feel happy. Like, how do I get endorphins? How do I feel good? Like, how do I get into that new role? That was it. That is because I've done it, but that was the most difficult thing that I've had to do.
One of our audience, hi Victor. One of our audience said that's an incredible analogy and perspective on scale up CEO. I agree. I think also, like, one of the things that is like, You are amazing, amazing storyteller. Like I feel like, we have a lot of guests on and I feel like a lot of people focus on I think like the tactics are very, very important. But I think
Mm.
you're really good at like articulate in a way that like everybody can understand. And then you take people on a journey to go
Mm.
through these like up and down with you.
Yeah, but
I wanna
thank
I
you.
wanna be you one day and like tell me how to get there.
Yeah, I'm super long-winded though. Sorry, I'm apologies to all the listeners. Like I go on and go on, but Epidemic is my baby. I love this. It's
Dude,
what I've done.
15 years and like it's a long journey. I want to know like how do you yeah, actually one of the question is I think being a great storytelling, being a good person who is great at like convincing people to join you. Like essentially I feel like CEO's job is like a sales job, right? Like you have to convince this, convince that, like get customer, get money, get top human to join.
Mhm.
I think the storytelling skill is like a tier one skill that everybody should acquire. Um, can you give us like a TLDR on like how you would improve this if someone who's like not very good at it?
Sure. I think that, well, first off, acknowledging there's this giving a good long speech is deemed easy, but giving a good short speech is very difficult, which is sort of not intuitive, but it's true, right? And so I think that besides plenty of practice, I think that I'm a huge fan of not history because that sounds sort of too ambitious and quasi, but I love like 80% of all people who hear music, they actually don't listen to the lyrics. I don't know why
Mhm,
that's okay. People just listen to the melody. But I
mhm,
think it's like 10 or 20% of us, we listen to the lyrics, like the texts speak
mhm,
to us. And I've always been fascinated about listening to songs, stories, what they mean. I've
mhm,
been into sort of, I'm a slow reader, but I like books, I like poetry, like sort of Christmas or gifts. I'm the person who writes the rhymes, and I think that's funny. I've always been interested in rhetoric and good speeches. I think YouTube is an incredible repository of just beautiful sort of storytellers and speakers. I've watched them all. Many of them, I've watched their speeches 10, 15, 20 times. And I think that if you watch them that many, like you can't not pick up some of their tactics, skills, the way they use a silence, comic relief, or hammer home a point, or talking triplets, or alliteration, or analogies. Like, so I think that if you're interested in being a storyteller, odds are that you're fascinated by stories, and so leaning into very many different kinds of storytellers, and just riffing off of them, trying to find your vibe. I think that at least in Sweden, Grace, I don't know where are you based?
Silicon Valley, the Bay Area.
Yeah, okay. So at least in Sweden, it's not uncommon if you're at dinner parties, like people give toasts, and even towards the end of the
Mhm,
dinner, like you want to give a speech, like try that. So make something funny, make something up, try at work. So give presentations. So I encourage all my colleagues as well that online, if you're passionate about a specific area, try and become a domain expert. Like write articles, publish stuff, put things out there, record your comment, your point of view. So you can practice with yourself and post stuff, and like your viewers give you feedback all the time if you're a good
mhm,
storyteller or if you're not, it's picking the right
mhm.
guests or not, I assume.
Mhm.
um, like use those instances such that you can practice, probably not in the subway because people are going to think you're a nut and they want to let you on again, but find those areas and sort of lean into others who've done it at scale before and try and sort of use that to find your own style, I guess.
Mm. I want to say hi to the audience. Hi, Jonas. Anyway, so I wonder what separates like a good CEO to like a mediocre CEO.
First, I don't think I'm the right person because I mean, most of the time I think I'm a mediocre CEO. Sometimes I'm a good CEO. Sometimes I'm probably really bad, and once in a while maybe exceptional. But like being a CEO is difficult. It's super duper hard. I'm a very reluctant CEO. Like the five co-founders, we were five of us. None of us wanted to be the CEO. It's like, no, I want to focus. I want to do my thing. I want to get into my sort of domain expertise. I was all about sales and business development. I wanted to try and yeah, I'm a problem solver. That's what I do. I
Mhm.
like puzzle. I like Sudoku. I like Rubik's cubes. I want to solve stuff. And being a CEO is literally being a jack of all trades. Like the amount of context switching is bizarre. I think if you were to crack my head open and look at it, it's nasty. I think it's not, like the wiring is all off because you're constantly switching micro, macro, customer supplies, competitors, analysts, board members, media. Like there are so many different perspectives, and you're ultimately responsible for all of them. And so your head is a massive mush of compromise where you have to try and chime in on many things. The only way to succeed, as I said, right, is like you realize that I can't do it. I don't want to do it. I'm not good at it. So I'll hire people 10 times smarter than myself who tell me what we should be doing. And I take their advice and I set them up for success. And I cheer when they do well and I take the heat when we don't. Sometimes you have to change those people out, but most of the time it's more about setting them up for success such that it really works. And so I think that, like, yeah, that's the role of the CEO. I think so. Being in that role, being in that seat, and like, it's a bit like being strapped into a rocket. And sort of, I think the name of how long can you ride the rocket? Because I don't think being a CEO isn't a career. It's something that you are for a while, but I think that the toll is so substantial that I wouldn't recommend someone to be a career CEO all the time. I happen to have been one at Epidemic for a long time, but that's only because I work with spectacular people and we do super fun stuff and I get to be goofy and I take my work super seriously, but I don't take myself seriously. I roll with pandas with pink guns and and pink rulers as well.
Amazing. What drives you?
Curiosity. I'm a curious
Um,
guy. I
I mean,
want to
you could
understand.
be,
I want to know.
but like, I mean, like, you could be doing so many things to be curious. You could
Yeah,
start a band. You could, like, I don't know, like,
yeah. So
be, I
Epidemic
don't
is
know,
the sixth company I've founded. So I think that
right?
kind of speaks to. That's interesting. Get it? Thumbs up.
Yeah. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
I think this supposed.
Oh. Okay. So the ones I know is you have one thumb, which is
Yeah.
one thumb, and you have the two, right?
Yeah. Oh
And then
wow.
you, yeah, 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 yeah. No, no, no. And then you have the balloons.
Oh my god, really?
No, 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 just one. One is
Okay.
balloon,
Oh, okay. So
and two
two.
is fireworks. Give it a second. Ah,
Oh
sprinkles.
my god, sprinkles.
This is
Okay.
fireworks.
Oh, fireworks.
But
Okay,
but there've
sorry,
been
yeah.
so
We got distracted by this.
trust me, there have
Okay.
been so many serious conversations that have gone really wrong because suddenly there's a firework when somebody says something super serious.
Um, what like yeah, like okay, so you have started 6 companies.
Yeah.
Um, what happens to all of them? Like I know that some got acquired because
Yeah.
based on your previous podcast, like the one before Epidemic Sound was acquired.
Yeah.
So what happened to the first like 5?
They got acquired. So we built a multi-channel network called United Screens. We sold it to a Swedish media company called Bonnier, and then they sold it to a German company called Bertelsmann. So that did really well. I then got involved. I didn't found, but I got involved with a gaming company called Toca Boca. I sat on the board for many years. That got sold to a Canadian company called Spin Master. So they did like really well in gaming for kids. We did a production company, which we sold to Diagostini called Zodiac Television. We've done a podcasting company called Perfect Day, which we sold to a company called Pop House. Um,
How do you sold so many company? Like how do you even
uh,
get
because like this is super important because I'd never be dumb enough to do what I do alone. Like I have one partner in crime who I've done everything with. His name is Zach. He's 17
Mhm.
years my senior. He's taught me the ropes, everything, and so we complement each other perfectly. And so he's he's great at transactions, people. He's way more creative than I am. I'm more of a work donkey. Like I get stuff from A to B and I don't fail. And so there's perhaps more to it than that, but we complement each other really well. And so together with him, we've been able to be fortunate to build companies, sort of get things slightly more right than wrong. So we complement each other. Epidemic, as I said, is 5 co-founders. And then on top of that, we have operators, which I think that any chance I get, I say operators are the unsung heroes. It's bizarre that us founders get to sit and do these interviews, because what we do is mildly interesting. Like, we have a quirky idea, but success is, what's the expression? 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. And so, like, the operators are the really sort of tactical, strategic, smart thinkers, get stuff done, rally people. So I think that operators is a huge reason why I sit here, because people just are amazing at their jobs. And so, yeah, I think that back to it's about curiosity. That's the driver. The reason we sold companies is because I keep great company. Again, back to that's my skill. Like, I like to think I'm a good judge of character, and I know what talent looks like. I was chuckling as you were giving me my background. You were super on point. I got to go to great schools in Sweden, but I then went and did a year in Philly at Wharton, which was super important for my development, because that's the first time I got to see real raw talent up close. Like, the people at Wharton are kick-ass smart and kick-ass ambitious. And I think they need to be, because the school is so ridiculously expensive, but sort of it aligns your incentives, right, to get value for your money. But at an early age, I kind of saw what the most talented people in the world were like. Like, how hard did they push themselves? How smart were they? How quickly could they connect the dots? And you get very checked when you're like, okay, like, this is the bar. Like, if I want to make a dent in the universe, I need to be at this level, or preferably above. Let's go. So I think that's
Mm,
important.
Okay, I want to be mindful of time. I don't know if you have more time. I'll cut to w- okay, 1 minute fire round. Okay, so what's your favorite book?
I remember reading Garp's World, John Irving, and that was a great book. I have a Swedish book called Den vidunderliga kärlekens historia, which roughly translates the incredible story of love. And the third one I would mention is a German guy called Patrick Süskind, who wrote a weird, dark book called The Perfume, which is great.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Mm, Hands down, my wife.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Oh, dead or alive?
It's your party.
Oh, I'd like to sit with Sam Altman and learn a little bit more what happened on that sort of conspicuous weekend, right? That would be cool.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Outside of work, you can find me in the Swedish countryside. I get super analog, so you'll find me running or picking mushrooms or cross-country skiing or walking in the woods, or doing something on or with water, boats, canoeing, swimming, stuff like that.
It's a picking mushroom for me, but anyway.
It's not the kind of mushroom you think, though. It's the regular edible kind. So sorry to make you disappointed.
Oh, okay. So the audience asked what music he's listening to when he's not working.
So it's always with vocals, right? So I'm a huge fan of listening to stories. So if I could recommend like one great song which I think you should listen to, go old school and listen to a song called "A Boy Named Sue" by Johnny Cash. That's an interesting song with a great twist.
Amazing. Well, Oscar, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Grace, and thank you everyone for listening and standing out with my accent and my long-winded answers.